Hey everyone, and welcome back. I bet a lot of you listening are thinking about how to take your creative skills to the next level with some awesome graphic design or even 3D stuff.
Yeah, those are popular choices these days.
They are, but that whole RAM, SSD, GPU jargon can be a bit overwhelming, right?
Totally. It's a bit like trying to understand the offside rule in football.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So we've been going through some SQA reports and course materials.
To try and figure out how to make this all a bit easier to understand,
Exactly. No computer science degree needed here.
we want to make sure you don't just know what the hardware is,
Right.
but you understand WHY. It's important for creative work.
So important. Okay, let's set the scene.
Okay.
Imagine you're designing a killer new logo for a local band,
Nice.
or creating a 3D model of the latest Earn Brew can. You'd probably be using industry standard software. They need some serious computer power to run smoothly.
It's true.
You wouldn't try to run a marathon in wellies, right?
Exactly. So let's start with RAM.
Uh,
It's your computer's short-term memory.
it's workspace. Think of it like your desk.
Ooh, I like that
The
analogy.
more desk space you have, the more projects you can spread
I
out.
work on comfortably. The more RAM you have, the more programs and files you can have open at the same time.
Without your computer slowing down.
Exactly. Like when I have a million tabs open in my web
Oh
browser.
my gosh, me too. It's a constant struggle.
And with graphic design and 3D modeling. So how much RAM do you really need?
For basic 2D design work, 8 gigabytes of RAM might just about get you by. If you want to create amazing 3D models and renderings.
At least 16 gigabytes of RAM is a good starting point.
And if you're working on complex scenes with tons of detail,
32 gigabyte or even more might be necessary.
it's true. Think about if you're building a detailed 3D model of, say, a massive Cayley Hall.
With textures and lighting and all those intricate details.
Your computer needs to hold all that information
While you're working, if you don't have enough RAM, it'll feel like you're wading through mud.
every time you try to do anything. Okay, next up,
SSDs.
these are like storage drives on steroids. They're so fast.
Like imagine you're waiting for a bus,
That never seems to arrive.
and then you jump into a sports car and zoom to your destination.
I love that. So with an SSD, your software opens in a flash,
Files load super quickly.
and those long rendering times are basically gone. Trust me, you will want at least a 512 gig of SSD.
For your main drive, that's where you'll install your software and work on your amazing projects.
Okay, let's talk about the real powerhouses of your computer,
Okay.
the GPU and CPU,
Essential for anything visual.
especially if you're doing 3D work,
Think of it this way. Your CPU is like the manager,
organizing and delegating tasks,
but the GPU is the artist.
actually creating the images and rendering those awesome 3D models.
A good GPU can handle all those complex calculations and visual effects.
Makes your work look stunning.
And ensures everything runs smoothly without any lag.
It's like having a team of tiny digital artists working behind the scenes.
That's a great way to think about it. And we can't forget about the CPU.
The brain of your computer.
A powerful CPU is crucial for those demanding 3D modeling and rendering tasks.
Especially when you're working with detailed models in complex scenes,
Think of your CPU as the conductor of an orchestra.
making sure all the different components.
Work together in perfect harmony.
So we've covered the basics of RAM,
SSDs
CPUs,
and GPUs.
but how does all this affect your creative work?
It all comes down to processing time.
Have you ever had to wait forever for a video to render?
Or a file to export.
It's so frustrating.
Like watching paint dry.
Tell me there's a better way,
Well, the good news is that upgrading your components can drastically reduce those processing times
so you can get things done quicker.
and have more time to focus on being creative.
Now that's what I'm talking about.
Mhm.
I keep hearing this buzzword.
Cloud computing.
Yes. Is that something I need to know about?
It's a total game changer. Imagine having access to the power of a supercomputer.
Right. From your laptop.
You can run really demanding software and render complex 3D scenes.
Without needing to buy an expensive top-of-the-line computer.
You're basically renting the processing power you need when you need it.
That's pretty cool.
Mhm.
What about cloud storage?
Cloud storage is a bit different.
Okay.
It's like having a secure online locker for all your files.
Oh.
You're probably already using cloud storage with things like Google Drive or Dropbox.
It's super handy for backing up your work and collaborating with others.
And accessing your files from any device. Just make sure you have a good internet connection.
Speaking of working on projects, what about the actual editing software?
That's where you really bring your creative vision to life.
Whether you're tweaking a photo or adding text to a design,
Or compositing different elements together.
you need software that can keep up with your ideas. So what are some key things to think about when choosing software?
Do your research and see what works best for the types of projects you want to create.
Okay, this is all making sense now. But what about file formats?
Ooh, yeah.
I've definitely had that moment of trying to open a file and getting that dreaded unsupported format message.
Oh, I know that feeling.
It's the worst.
File formats can be tricky.
So how do we avoid that?
You need to know which ones are widely compatible.
So you can share your work easily.
For images, JPG and PNG are usually safe bets.
So we've covered a ton of ground here.
We have
RAM SSDs,
CPUs,
GPUs, processing time, cloud computing.
cloud storage.
We even touched on editing software and file formats.
You're becoming quite the tech whiz.
I know, right? But remember, you don't need to be a computer expert overnight.
It's all about understanding the basics and knowing what you need your computer to do.
It's like having the right brushes and paints for your masterpiece. We'll be back in a jiffy to delve even deeper into specific hardware recommendations.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Now that we've got those tech basics down.
Let's see how it all works in practice.
Okay, so let's start with graphic design.
Sounds good.
You're working with images, layouts, typography.
Creating visual magic.
But to do that, you need a computer that can keep up with you.
So let's say I'm designing a coaster for a local band.
Okay.
What kind of hardware would I want?
You'd want at least 8 gigs of RAM, but ideally 16,
Especially if you're working with high-res images.
or lots of big files at once.
An SSD is a must-have.
It's like having a super speedy assistant.
I'm all about speed. What about the GPU?
You don't need the absolute top of the line.
Okay.
But a decent one will make a difference,
Especially for photo editing or vector graphics.
which can be pretty demanding,
And, of course, a good CPU to keep everything running smoothly,
especially when you're multitasking.
which is like all the time for graphic designer.
Pretty much. Okay, let's switch gears and talk about 2D CAD.
Okay.
Big part of the SQA curriculum.
I'm guessing precision is super important there.
You got it. Architectural plans, engineering diagrams.
Accuracy is everything.
For 2D CAD, 8 gigs of RAM should be enough for most things.
But again,
An SSD will really speed things up.
especially with complex drawings,
Lots of details.
SSDs are sounding pretty essential for anything creative.
Yeah, they really are. What about the GPU for 2D CAD?
Is it as important as for graphic design?
Not quite crucial,
Okay.
but it can still make a big difference.
Especially when you're zooming in and out or working with lots of layers.
It just makes everything smoother.
Okay, now let's talk 3D modeling and rendering.
All right.
This is where the hardware demands get serious.
It's where you're building and animating 3D objects,
Creating photorealistic images and animations.
like you see in video games and movies.
So if someone wants to create the next big video game,
What kind of setup should they be aiming for?
let's hear it.
Okay, so for 3D modeling, 16 gigs of RAM is the absolute minimum.
Anything less and you're going to have problems.
32 is recommended for a smooth experience.
And an SSD.
Absolutely essential. It'll make a huge difference.
I'm seeing a pattern here.
Okay, what about the GPU? This is where it gets exciting.
Tell me more.
For 3D work, a powerful GPU is super important.
Okay.
It handles all the complex calculations and rendering.
To bring those 3D scenes to life,
The better the GPU, the smoother everything runs and the more detail you can add.
it really is like having a team of digital artists working for you.
And don't forget the CPU.
Right, we can't forget about the brain.
It works together with the GPU to handle all the complex tasks.
They're a real power couple.
Absolutely. Now, what if you can't afford the most powerful computer?
Right, because those can get expensive.
That's where cloud computing comes in.
Oh yeah, cloud computing.
You can basically rent the processing power you need.
So you don't have to break the bank
It's a great way to get started with 3D modeling.
without spending a fortune.
And you mentioned cloud storage earlier.
Yeah, what about that?
It's incredibly useful for creatives. You can store all your projects, back up your work,
And collaborate with others.
no matter where they are in the world.
But you need a good internet connection.
Definitely. Don't want to lose access to your files.
What are some key things you've learned so far?
For me, it's that having the right computer hardware can make a massive difference.
It's not about having the latest gadgets.
It's about having tools that help you do your best work.
I agree. What about choosing editing software?
You need to choose software that's designed for the type of work you do,
Photo editing, video editing.
whatever it is.
Yeah.
And the hardware you have will affect how well it performs.
Okay.
Editing software can be really demanding on your computer.
So you need a fast CPU, lots of RAM, and a good GPU.
Absolutely. What about file formats?
They always trip me up.
You need to know the different types and what they're best for.
Like JPGs are good for web graphics.
But TIFFs are better for printing.
So it's not just about what looks good.
You need the right format for the job.
And when you're sharing files, compatibility is important.
You don't want to send someone a file they can't open.
That's so frustrating.
PDFs are usually a safe bet for sharing documents.
Okay, so we've covered a lot here.
We have, from RAM and SSDs to cloud computing and file formats.
I'm feeling much more confident about all this tech stuff now
That's great to hear. This is hopefully giving you a good foundation
for making decisions about the tech you need.
to pursue your creative passions.
All right, so we've covered all the concepts.
All those techie terms.
Now let's talk actual computer recommendations.
Okay. I bet a lot of you are thinking about what you need for SQA courses.
And for future careers, of course.
So let's break it down by budget.
Sounds
So
good.
let's say you don't have a ton of money to spend.
Under £1,000.
Can you get a decent setup for that?
What do you think?
Absolutely. You can find a laptop with a quad-core processor,
Okay.
16 RAM,
Huh?
512 SSD, a dedicated graphics card.
That should be good enough for most graphic design and even some 3D modeling.
Yeah, for sure.
What if you can spend a bit more? Like around £1,500.
Ooh. Oh, okay, so then you can get a laptop with the more powerful processor.
Like a 6-core or 8-core.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And maybe bump up the RAM to 32 gigs
Okay.
and a 1 TB SSD,
Nice.
plus a higher-end graphics card with 6 or 8 gigs of VRAM.
So smoother rendering, faster loading times.
All that good stuff.
Now, for those who are really serious about this,
I want the best of the best.
the desktop PC is the way to go.
Yeah.
Let's go all out. What are we talking about here?
We're talking a super powerful processor like an Intel Core i9
Okay.
or AMD Ryzen 9.
At least 32 gigabits of RAM.
Ideally 64 or even more.
Okay.
A super fast NVMe SSD with at least 1 TB of storage.
Wow. And for the graphics card.
A top-tier card like an NVIDIA GeForce RTX 40 series,
Oh.
AMD Radeon RX 7000 series.
That is a dream machine.
With a setup like that, you can handle anything.
Complex 3D rendering, massive files.
You name it.
So we've covered the budget options, the mid-range choices.
And even the top-of-the-line setups.
But before we wrap up, I want to give one last piece of advice.
Okay, go for it.
Don't be afraid to experiment. You don't need the most expensive equipment to be creative.
That's so true.
Use what you have. Explore different software.
Try new things.
Don't be afraid to make mistakes.
That's how you learn.
Maybe one day you'll be designing the next big Scottish brand.
Or creating an amazing video game.
The possibilities are endless. Thanks for joining us, everyone.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope this has helped you navigate the tech side of the creative world.
Happy creating.